I was reading in the news this week, somebody described what the world that we're in right now and used the term, it called it a polycrisis, just because there's crisis going on everywhere. And I saw somebody this week that I hadn't seen in a long time, and she said, everybody that I know is just really having a hard time and struggling and having their own personal polycrisis, it seems like. And so what better time to talk to Bill than when everybody's having a hard time. I always love to get the chance to have a conversation up front here. And that just seemed like the right thing to call it. Was a big pain time with Bill.
My wife agrees.
Yeah. But there were really two sparks for this conversation this morning. The first one was a passage that we looked at a couple weeks ago here in our study in Mark, and I'll just revisit it real quickly. I'm going to front load my talking and then
I'll bring it back to you. Yeah, that's fine.
And then hand it off here. But the passage, I just wanted to put it up here again to read it real quickly, was out of Mark 1, where it said, "At that time Jesus came from Nazareth in Galilee and was baptized by John in the Jordan. And just as Jesus was coming up out of the water, he saw heaven being torn open and the Spirit descending on him like a dove. And a voice came from heaven, 'You are my Son, whom I love, with whom I am well pleased.' And then it said, at once the Spirit sent him out into the wilderness, and he was in the wilderness 40 days, being tempted by Satan. He was with the wild animals, and angels attended him." And we talked about how in both of those things, in Jesus' baptism and then going out into the wilderness, it was him really identifying with humanity being under judgment, under the curse, and experiencing the suffering of humanity. And so we said when Jesus was in the river being baptized, it represented him bearing judgment, because he didn't have sin, he didn't need to repent, he didn't need to confess of anything, but he was putting himself in our position. He was accepting the process. He told John, this is the way it needs to be, and submitting to, like, life is just full of process and being willing to go through it. Identifying with us as sinful people there, and then modeling humility when, like, he's the one who was going to baptize people with the Holy Spirit, and still he went through this process. So there was that, and then in the desert, here he is. He's feeling loneliness. He's suffering the weakness of not eating and being cold and exposed to the elements, and then experiencing the temptation there of Satan. And then facing the threats of, it said the wild animals were there too. So all this is going on. Laura, I feel like there's just a little bit of a ring at the top, so maybe we could pull me down just a little bit. It would be great. So all this to say, Jesus really stepped into human suffering. And I was thinking about a quote by Henry Nouwen, who said, "Our efforts to disconnect ourselves from our own suffering end up disconnecting our suffering from God's suffering for us. The way out of our loss and hurt is in and through." And so just a little visual to go with that is that if this is our pain and we're always looking for ways to run away from it.
That's funny, man. Come on. I love
It's serious here.
I'll have Maya. I can have Maya do your sketches. Yeah. Those are great. That's awesome.
But when we're running away, Christ is there in our pain, and so in essence, we're kind of pulling ourselves away from Him. So okay, that was all spark number one. The second spark was something that you said with you had been talking to. I think you were talking to a client you mentioned and said that...
Not in specifics.
You didn't know.
Yeah.
No, you would never. Wasn't a specific client. I don't even know who this was, but you were saying they were kind of wondering why they were there, or you were asking them why they were there, and then you made this comment where you said, "I'm here to help you feel your pain," and that just really struck me because it feels like normally when people think of going to therapy, it's because they want to end their pain. Or they want to get out of it, I would think. And so tell us a little more. Now let's use that as our jumping off point of what do you mean by that statement, and whatever you want to say about that.
Yeah, I was wondering if we might just take a minute just to pray real quick.
I think that's a great idea.
I think anytime that you get into pain, like everyone in here carries something. And sometimes we just kind of jump into it. And I think most of us, I know for me too, like when I'm in a lot of pain, like I don't really want to be in my body. I don't want to feel it. I like that little thing where he's running away from it. But I'm also learning, especially as I get older, like turning and starting to move toward it when you have space, like is better. For a whole lot of reasons. It just feels really uncomfortable and shitty. So I think praying about it is important just because we're stepping into things that are above and beyond me, all of it, all of us. And there is that relationship and that tenderness and that comfort and that relief and healing available to us. But sometimes we're heading off to fix it rather than just figuring out what it is or sitting with it. So if I could just pray real quick, that'd be great. God, it's really you that heals. We just get in on the process with you. I always sense like you're already there before we get there, and that's comforting to me. And God, it's not just pain in and of itself. There's a relationship that we have with you that I think in some ways only pain really cements and reveals. So I'm grateful that you use that to draw us to you. But also, sometimes it just feels so crazy and overwhelming and lost to feel it and not have it heal quickly. And I have no idea what I'm stepping into or talking to today, because there's so many people here that I don't know the depth of what they struggle with, but you do. And God, I pray that you just give me the words to speak. It's not on me or anyone else to heal anything. It's on you. And we just want to submit to that as we talk and just be wise about maybe connecting to ourselves and what you've given us to feel and work through and what our crosses are. So we're just grateful that you went before us, and that you know how this is and you know how this goes, and that you hold it. In Jesus' name, amen. Yeah, I think it's weird, but I'm a pain peddler, I guess. I mean, to be honest, when people come in, they have all kinds of reasons as to why they're there. Some I know and some I don't, but it's usually after about a year where somebody comes in, they're like, why am I here? Like, what are we doing? And I always ask them why they think they're there. And a lot of times they're being very unkind to themselves and trying to work real hard to heal. And they feel as exhausted as when they first started, if not more. And then they know a bunch more. And they don't feel relief. And it's kind of at that point where they realize, hey, the things that I'm doing aren't really working. So why am I here? And it's interesting to tell them, like, I'm here to help you hurt better, to hurt deeper, so that you can actually experience joy and comfort, freedom. But yeah, I think that's important to say, like, unless I suffer it, I can't really take anybody anywhere. So I've had to suffer a lot of grief, pain, and I've run from it way more than anybody in here. So I feel like I learned a lot, and I'm learning a lot from that. So I don't know if that makes sense. But
yeah, so So what do you mean by to hurt better?
Yeah, I just think there's a context to our pain, and sometimes it feels like there is no context to the suffering that we're going through. And with Israel, with different things where you just look at it and you're like, it's so much bigger than me, than I can fathom, that I can deal with. And man, that just feels overwhelming. And to be honest, like sometimes the only thing we're left to do is hurt over something or just feel something. And I just think that feels very insignificant in comparison to the things that are going on. But I also think that that's where God enters into our life in a different way, when we're just willing to be vulnerable, willing to hurt. And I found that that's just where, I feel like God is, of course, everywhere, but he's more in the places that I'm running from. And I find him to be there when I show up there. So I don't know if that makes any sense. But
So,
Laura, I'm going to drink out of this. Good job on the muting.
you talked about somebody, first of all, a year of trying to get to their pain.
Well, that's pretty short.
That's not a quick fix, basically. But what? Obviously, if we're not feeling our pain, or we're not feeling it in a way that is healing, I guess, or moving us forward, why is it so often that's where we get stuck or stay there?
Can I turn it on you?
Oh, no. Yes, of course.
So when you think about like the things that hurt you, right?
Yeah.
I just hate theoretical things, so that,
Yeah.
Not hate, but like I don't work in them as well. When you notice like that something's hurting you, like when you go to address it, like what are some of the things that you do like first? I already know the answer to these because I've been your friend for a long time.
Yeah, I think first I would try to explain it away, or find a different way of viewing what's happening than maybe pain that I need to deal with.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And I think then I scramble for what I can do to fix it, like something like you said. You said people work hard trying to heal, and I think that's part of it. I will attempt to figure out, problem solve. I go into problem solving mode. And
absolutely,
then,
yeah.
I don't know. Did I miss one? Yeah. No. I try to just keep functioning a lot and not feel it.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, and I think the interesting part is I don't know what people have access to sometimes when they come in. So you may be bargaining with it. You can do the 5 stages of grief or whatever, but they're all over the place. And you can be in anyone at any time. But I think you're right. Like, I think when we get hurt, there's something where we go to, something's wrong with me. Like, what did I do, or what should I have done to maybe not make that pain, so bad? And then there's a shame that's associated with that. Like, well, if I wouldn't have, we do all this bargaining. One of the things that you didn't mention was like, be vulnerable, really. Like,
well, I don't go there first.
Well, that's the one you missed. But like, no, but it doesn't, that's not our first thing. Right. So I think, sometimes it takes a year to break down even what you've been doing just to protect yourself from what hurts you.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, I don't know what I'm stepping into. So some people have a ton of pain that they're bringing into the room.
Right.
So if they don't have access to it, I'm not going to open it up.
Yeah.
Right. It's sometimes just what you're doing is kind of the way that God works with it, which is over time and just kindly leaving space for you to become aware of it even.
Yeah.
And then sometimes that's a couple years, right?
Yeah, that's what I think is so, I don't know, amazing or humbling is how long I can go before suddenly seeing a new thing that needs healing, or that's the way forward, or even when I feel like I've been looking for it for a long time, and then I can see God's kindness actually in allowing me to get there at that pace. But I think sometimes it feels like cruelty when it takes a long time.
Yeah, I was talking to my wife last night, and she was just saying, like, how sometimes when you're in pain and you're asking God to enter into it, it just doesn't feel like it happens very quick. And I think that's so right. And she was just saying where, the evil gets in on that. Like, well, why aren't you hearing an answer? Why aren't you getting better? And then you start looking around. Well, that person's not struggling with it. They're not doing like that. They seem to be able to do it better. And I don't know, like when you suffer, it's this place where it brings up all these insecurities, all these anxieties, all this shame, like, why am I, what, and you think about it, we all know all these things that are true about God, but we're not embodying them sometimes just because they're so hard to live out. But that's where I see and have seen God enter in and just be so kind to me and just be patient and allow me to hurt and not be producing something, allow me to literally just feel like him taking care of me, loving me. But had I not experienced that pain or suffering, I don't think I ever would have experienced it that way. I think I would have just kind of been at a distance from it. So it really takes, it's not a lack of faith that makes you struggle. It's not most of the time, it's just, pain is so hard and wily. And it's, I think the thing that God is asking us to do to get closer to him, right? Yeah,
which I feel like is sometimes counterintuitive with the idea of faith, right? Because our go-to all the time is that if we're believing right, it should alleviate the pain, right? We assume that what we're experiencing that's difficult is somehow because we're not doing it right, or God is not doing it right. So, but it feels like when you really look at Scripture and you look at the story of the cross and what we're invited into, that feels the opposite of the gospel, but it seems like it's our natural default to assume that that's how it's going to work.
Yeah, I agree.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I just think it's paradoxical. Like, it's counterintuitive to allow something to hurt you and go deeper into it. Like, we want that relief and comfort. And I think, look, just to be clear, like, I'm not saying that avoiding pain all the time is like bad. Like, sometimes we're experiencing something that is so painful, like we just can't access it, or we don't have room for it, we don't have space for it. So there are people in here who are suffering on a deeper level that are on a razor's edge. So I'm not saying, oh yeah, you should really jump right in the middle of that.
Right.
A bruised reed I won't break, a smoldering wick I won't snuff out. There's a gentleness to the way that God actually works with pain. He's not trying to pull the Band-Aid off. He's not trying to cut something off. Like, I think what we're trying to do is work around a pretty big abyss and slowly close it up over time. And that can take a long, long time. But I think he's very honoring of the pain that we have and wanting to be in relationship with in the midst of it. You can even feel it in the room how thick it is when we talk about pain, right? Like, it's just hard. No one really, we don't really want to address it. But that's what I think is the paradoxical nature. Like, there's no shame in being human. Like, we want to run away from it. We want to comfort it. We want to relieve it. And all our problems kind of come out of that, if you really think about it.
Yeah.
But God isn't ashamed of our human nature, like ever. He loves us. So he understands that we're going to chase those things.
Yeah.
But he's in pursuit of us, regardless of what we do. So
yeah,
there's a lot of hope in that.
Yeah.
To me.
Yeah. You, I'm going to put another diagram up here.
Oh, that's a good one.
Not that.
Yeah.
That's always a good one.
Yeah, it's coming true, isn't it?
But so when we are with Christ, experiencing our pain and not avoiding it, you made a comment that when we're not doing that, that it makes our faith myopic and small, and that when we do that, it actually expands our world out. Mm-hmm. And I'm just curious if you can say a little bit more about that.
Yeah, sometimes I think it's just awful, right? When we're experiencing pain, even if we're being loved in the midst of it.
Yeah.
It just feels uncomfortable and terrible. But that's not the end of that story. So it's super expansive. Like, pain actually has the potential to like expand us out into places of joy and relief and beauty and comfort. So there's these things when we're trying to avoid it that make us really small. And I feel like most of the time when I don't feel close to God around things like this, or other people are saying I don't see him, it's because they're running or avoiding, or sometimes don't even know that they're avoiding the pain that they're experiencing. What I have seen is when people allow that, even in small increments, right, they start to see life come back again. So it's interesting even how the body works. Like, it shuts down certain things when we're in a lot of pain, and so sometimes we don't get to feel it for a while. But when we do, there's a comfort, there's a relief. It's excruciating sometimes, but if we're willing to be uncomfortable, then we can grow. And I learned some of that in just special forces training, where your brain quits and your body shuts down way before you can actually need to stop what you're doing. And so when you would be in pain and things were burning, your brain is like, you need to quit, you need to stop doing that, it hurts. But then you have a giant sergeant in your face yelling at you to do 3 more, and you can, right? And then you can do 5 more, and then you can do 7 more. It's just you pushing your body to the point where it fails, and then pushing past that, you learn that your body can actually handle a lot more. When you're thinking about emotional pain, though, there's a fragility to that, and an exposure and a vulnerability that most of us don't want to have. So it just sucks. Like, I'm going to open this up, and I'm worried that you're going to see me as a failure, or you're going to see that I'm worthless, or you're going to hear this shameful thing that happened. And the more that people open that up, then the more that they get to be themselves, the more that they get to quit running from themselves. They're not just running from the pain. A lot of times they're running from themselves. And themselves is where the pain is, if that makes any sense. Yeah. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, in fact, you had another quote about, see if it's on here next. It said, if you can't connect with your body, you're not in conflict with the other person, you're in conflict with yourself. That was a good one.
Does that make sense to anybody?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't even know if people...
Can you say a little more about that?
Yeah, I think for me, I grew up being disconnected from my body, just because I was in such terrible situations. And when I finally realized that I could be connected, what I started to realize is, boy, a lot of the conflicts I'm having with my wife, my family, or whatever, are not really about them. Like, I'm having a hard time connecting to me. And if I can't get to that, like, how am I supposed to be in relationship with you, or relationship with God, or relationship with myself, right? So I'm finding, like, really cool avenues to help with people, especially those in Christian faith who feel like I haven't really ever felt like I've connected to God. And what's interesting is they start realizing I was never really connected to myself that well, you know. And it's not that God can't, override that or connect or whatever. It's just that we're not experiencing it in a very deep way. And I think that was the shift for me of like, oh, when I feel this in my body, it's very different than it just being in my head.
Yeah.
And for all of us, like it feels safer to be in what we know rather than in what we feel. And then other times, if you're in just what you feel and you don't, you can't think, that's awful too. That's a hell unto itself, right?
Right.
I think we have like 19,000 thoughts a day. So if you're going down every feeling and every road that a thought takes you, that's awful.
Yeah.
So I'd have to be present and show up first to be in a conflict with another person. And then if I show up and I'm present, is God going to work with that differently than if I'm disconnected? And I think the answer is yes. But with pain, that's the first thing. We want to dissociate. We want to disconnect. We want to get rid of it. We want to seek comfort. But maybe if we could start to shift back into allowing even a little bit, we'll start to build up a tolerance of facing what we're scared of or running from. And I think then the gospel gets real, right? Like, well, if I'm going to face this, I'm going to need a community. I'm going to need a higher power. I'm going to need love. I'm going to need support. So I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah. So what
does that answer what you were asking about the quote? Or?
Yeah, I think what I'm wondering is like what does it look like to not be connected to your body? Like, how do I know if I'm not connected?
This is a good one to ask everybody.
Yeah, that is a good question.
Because everybody has a different way of doing it, right?
How do you know when you're not connected to yourself?
Anybody?
You feel like you're outside of yourself. You just went.
Yeah.
Or like you're going through the motions.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
When I'm just spinning up here, and
Yes.
all of the information in the world is living in my head.
Yeah.
It's not integrating. And for me, it means I'm not connected to my emotions either.
Yeah.
Because I'm shutting everything off from here down and
Yes.
just hanging out.
Yep.
there.
Yep.
And it inhibits your connection to other people.
Yeah.
You can't connect with them.
Right.
Stop breathing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had a really interesting phone call the other day with it was just a customer service. I was following up on a stupid little fee that was an error on the account, and the person talking to me was not letting me actually tell my story, and all of a sudden I couldn't breathe, and it took me back to a couple times when I was a kid, and I hadn't been able to explain myself, and I got in trouble for something that I hadn't done because I couldn't get it out. And so all of a sudden, but it's that whole thing of like just breath was gone there. But
Another one over here.
yeah.
I was gonna say, like, when I'm not connected with my body, I feel like without God and therefore like without light. So I feel like my world is a little bit duller and like
Yeah.
That's a good description. Yeah. I used to say sometimes that it felt like there was a flat spot on my soul. And like I felt like I should be feeling something and I couldn't.
Did you say like color?
Yeah.
That's so cool. That's
Yeah.
a great way to describe it.
can you repeat hers? She has a tiny voice. We couldn't hear.
Yeah. She basically said that it feels like when she's disconnected from God and life, and it feels duller. Is that that the color is not as vibrant there.
I think, oh yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, when I don't know what to do with an emotion or how to even think about it, there's always my refrigerator.
Yes.
I love that. Yes. Let's go. Right. Yeah. You and me both, like, for sure. But that is a great way to talk about, if we could put those two things together. What you said is like, when I'm disconnected, I feel like life is black and white, like, and there's no depth to it. It's just 2D. And then when you start to breathe, when you start to look up and stay in your sensation, when you start to allow those feelings to be there, then it starts to transform. And it's not always a pleasant feeling to feel what we're feeling, because sometimes it feels awful, but it's three-dimensional. And the reality is that's so integral. What she's saying is that if there's a pain, then there's also a beauty. Like, pain and joy are intertwined. There's no way to have one without the other. And if I can't have that, I want ice cream, or I want the fridge, or I want to drink Jack Daniels, or I want whatever, right? Like, because if we're going to suffer and there's not going to be any outcome any different than just feeling the pain, then it's probably better to do all those other things, right? So the reality is, watching this over these last years, I've watched everybody do all those other things. I've done a lot of those other things, and none of them work, and none of them are satisfying. And they make me feel empty and two-dimensional and colorless. And so it's, I don't get up in the morning going, woohoo, suffering. Like, that's not what I want to do. But what I'm finding is, the more that I allow that, the more that I'm met. And the more that I'm met, the color comes in, fills in. And then the pulls to go to the fridge feel less. They're still there because I'm a human being, but I don't feel the pull so hard. And I feel like, I need relationship, I need community, I need to tell Jeff that I'm pissed off today or whatever, right? Because then I'm in relationship. But I think it's so integral. Like, it's just a good way to remember it. It's called blah. Blah. Breathe. When you breathe, after about 5 to 10 breaths, your body starts to self-soothe and self-regulate. So when you're talking about the spinning, a lot of times the spinning is because we're disconnected from our body, and the traumatic trigger is making us spin in the wrong side of our brain. So we never find the answer to that question. We just spin. And the way to know that you are disconnected or triggered is the breath. Because if you're breathing shallow or not breathing at all, that means you're dysregulated. The second is looking up, and that I'm not saying looking up into the stars, I'm just saying on the horizon. And the reason is, you're going to be in your 5 senses when you do that. If you want to get back to your body, if you'll notice, when most people get triggered, they look down, and the amygdala and the brain stem actually push your head forward so that you stay out of your sensation when you're in pain. So that's why a lot of people look down. But if you can get back up here, you're in your 5 senses, so then it's harder to get out of your body. The last one is allowing, and allowing just means that, where do you feel it? Where do you notice it in your body? So most emotions will last 90 to 120 seconds, which means you're basically surfing a wave of feeling. So you'll get on that crest and then it'll drop. Most people don't want to endure pain because they don't think it's going to end. So I don't want people to get on the train of like, we're going to be in pain for the next 5 years. That sounds awful, and I don't want to do it with you. But if you can do it a little bit incrementally, then that's what we're looking for. Just small shifts. Please, if you're with somebody that tells you to just jump into the middle of it, or you just need to feel it, blah, 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 that's awful. Just do small incremental things so that you can build up not only space and room, but a tolerance to that feeling. The other part is, do not work with pain if you're not plugged into life. If you're not experiencing abundance or joy in some area of your life, please do not open up pain. That's overwhelming, and people can die, right? And people are very fragile that way. So please, here today, don't say, just go jump into your pain and your life will be better. No. You need community. You need the space and room to do it. You need a higher power. And you need to have love around you. If you don't, then don't do that. And if you don't have that, find that. right? And there's no rush. God is not in a hurry. I've had so many people be mad at me, like, I've been seeing you for blah, blah, blah. And I'm, no. Yes. And what they find out is, oh man, I was in way more pain than I thought I was. I had no idea. It was like that story that you had about your dad and the gun.
Yeah.
You don't have to tell me if you don't want to.
No, I can.
I set it up for you. Go ahead.
No, there was. I shared this with Bill years ago, and I'm telling him this story from when I was 5, and I was out in our yard, and we lived in a little bit of a rough neighborhood, and there was my dad was going out. There was something going on, sort of a domestic situation in a car that was out in front of us, and my dad goes out, stands at the edge of our yard to confront this person, and a guy's coming down the road with a gun and all this, and so I'm watching all this from outside as my dad's doing this. My dad's just not backing down, and anyway, I'm describing this all to Bill at the time, and I'm kind of laughing because I'm going, yeah, if you knew my dad, this just feels funny to me. Like, and he's going, wow, it's actually really traumatic. And I was like, oh. And I'd never connected with the trauma of my experience, and so I don't know where we were going with.
I just like when you tell stories.
Yeah.
Man.
So anyway,
no, I think we were going with it because sometimes the body can hide it from you.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
The body will shut down because it's necessary, but the body doesn't forget what it is.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. I'm curious, you mentioned the 3 things people need of being community and space, and then a higher power. And I'm curious, I know you don't work exclusively with New Day clients, although we keep you pretty busy. But I'm curious what difference you have seen people who have Christ facing their pain versus not having access to Christ, and how would you describe how that shows up or looks different? Or?
Well, I think when I'm working with people, I don't care.
Right.
And what's interesting is when I've worked with people who don't know Christ, at the end of our work, there's like, so then what's next? Right? Mostly. Or they get really curious as to why, why would I want to allow this? Or why would I want to feel this? And, of course, Washington State says I can't say anything about that, so I just smile and then I say it, whatever. But the idea is, I can't, my charge is to help people with what they're suffering with, and if they can alleviate that, then they can get back into life and be themselves. So I take my orders there. But I think what's interesting about New Day is it's marked by people who are willing to suffer and have been through a lot and have been willing to be authentic about it. And that's been a cool place for me to be, because I needed that. I needed a place where I could heal. I needed a church environment that was accepting, loving. So I don't know if that answered your question, but
yeah. No, I think I would love to just hear if there's if there's been any particular way that for you personally in facing your own pain that you have seen Christ show up in a tangible way, that I don't know if anything comes to mind we're talking about him entering into our suffering and giving meaning to it or meeting us in it. And if there's any any thought for you of a way that has actually looked in real life?
Yeah, I think one of the reasons I ended up doing what I was doing in life and do now and enjoy it is I don't know that I had necessarily much of a choice about it. My life was pretty much seeped in pain. So I could give you a million different things, but I think my dad's suicide was probably one of those things that I saw Christ and community and healing come out of. It was awful, and still is. But in terms of like the energy I had in the beginning, it's very different now. Like I miss him, I love him, I hate him sometimes. But there's a sense of being, and one of the things I hate in Christianity is when we're like, what's the lesson? What are you learning from that? Like, I don't, what's actually happening is I'm living my life. I'm living my life, and this is really hard. And that's where Christ has never been theoretical to me. Like, I need him because I can't heal without him. I need him because he's the one that heals and comforts and relieves. And I feel like I was forced into a position to meet him in a different way because of my circumstance. So that transformational process is, I can't talk about the entirety of that here, but it was just far more intimate and far more, less about what happened to me and more about being known and being loved.
Yeah.
I think I was just like, can we just relieve this or can we just overcome that? And I think I was just inviting me deeper into being loved because he knew that's what I needed. And I think I fought him for quite some time. I was just like, hey, I'm in pain. I don't want to be loved more. I want this fixed or whatever. But I think very soon after that, he started working on me that way. So I don't know if that makes
that's
sense.
good. Thank you for sharing that.
Because, I can't remember who said it. I think it was Muhammad Ali's trainer. He says, everything's great and you have a plan until you get punched in the face. And that's what it felt like. I got punched in the face. So it was like, okay, well, my plan sucks. So what's going to happen next? Because I can't think my way out of this. Like you said, like I'm spinning. Like I want to go to the fridge. I feel less color. Like I can't connect to other people. All the things that you said are right. I just left. And, I'd always have to try to come back. I have a family to be with and I have people that love me. So it's like, no, I need to get back to my body. And when there's so much pain there, I understand why people are out of their body. And then when I think about the society as a whole, they need to know that we can meet them where they are. And if we can't suffer, we can't meet them where they are because they're in a deep amount of pain.
You had that was
there we go.
No, there's this was a line that you said the other day when we were talking about kind of what your hope was for this morning, that you want people to take comfort in knowing their uncomfortability is right. Do you want to say any more about that and what that means?
Yes, but I also want to give people one more acronym. And you mentioned this with the fridge. So most people like cake. So if you want to write down cake, cake is curious, aware, kind, and empathetic. If you're going to open up something in your life, you need also to be that, which is I'm curious about what's happening. Like curiosity then kind of spurs awareness, like, oh, this is happening to me. And then that has to be met with kindness. That has to be met with compassion. And then empathy, right? Like sometimes like when we're overwhelmed, triggered, whatever, we need to be empathetic to what's happening because probably didn't receive empathy. Also, self-contempt is where we protect ourselves the most. If I can go after myself and be mean to myself, then you can't get to me. So that unravels that stuff. Curious, kind, aware, empathetic. And I just think about how Jesus comes in those ways. Curious, kind, aware, empathetic, and meets us. Uncomfortability, there's no way to heal unless you're going to get uncomfortable. That's just how it is. And no matter what you do, whether it's running or lifting or whatever, if you're not uncomfortable at some point, then you just want to start breathing and become more aware, because there's some things that are probably there. But that uncomfortability, I think, is really good for us, rather than just being comfortable around things. And that doesn't mean you can't rest and settle down or whatever. It just means sometimes we need to let things and our body hear that we're going to do this other thing, even if it doesn't feel good. So,
Let's see. Do we have time for another question or two here? I think we do. Anybody, as you're listening, any thoughts or anything you'd want to ask Bill?
or Jeff.
Yeah, Ron?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, my experience coming to Christ, I was leaving a religious hell. I was running from that for 25 years, but I was directed by a voice coming from me, when are you going to do something about it? So I started doing group therapy. Well, what that did is it made it possible to clear the ground for the gospel. So then when I came here, I could see true humility and truth in the gospel. And it had a massive effect. But I had to clear the ground first. I think that was gospel.
That's good.
That quote for me made me think too, like I hate pain. Oh my gosh, I hate pain so much, and I spend so much energy trying to get out of it. But that, like, I feel like the goal, I want my goal to be like this super like zen space where nothing hurts. But the reality is, like, the uncomfortability is right. Also dignifies the pain of the world. Like, it's like, if I'm like, if someone is, if something awful and traumatic is happening in front of my face and I don't feel anything, that doesn't mean I'm healthy. Like, that means I'm numb. That's like sociopathic, you know? And so it's like we want to avoid discomfort, but I think it dignifies the reality of pain and the reality of the world, and then makes room for the gospel, because it's only when I can acknowledge how bad things are that, like, I can receive how good God is.
Right.
In a way, you know?
Right.
Yeah, well, and even the character of the gospel, like, that we're receiving, has suffering at the core of it, you know. And so often, I was just talking with somebody last week who was going, God, what are you doing with the suffering that was happening in her life? And you go, well, that's assuming that God's goal is to protect us from suffering. And you go, well, if Christ went to the cross and said, pick up your cross and follow me, then that's probably going to be part of the picture. And I don't know why it continues to surprise us so much. But
Yeah, I just I don't want to belabor the point because it's hard to stay present for this stuff while we're talking about it. Yes.
I've seen both my parents destroy their lives by being in constant pain. I used to have to listen to my dad hours and hours telling me how much he suffered because they had gotten a divorce and how his life had deteriorated. it got to the point where I couldn't hold it. I was a teenager, and I would run out the door crying and screaming because it was just too much. But it went on until he died at 81. Now I'm almost 83, and I still have repercussions of that. How do you help somebody to see that they're drowning in pain? They may feel the pain, but they're absolutely being sucked down in a hole, and pain is just pouring and pouring, and they can't escape, and they destroy their lives because of it.
Yeah, one, I'm so sorry. And two, I'm amazingly strong, right? Like as a teenager, there's no way a teenager can hold that. And so my experience with that, because I've lived in a lot of things like that, is that that's not actually suffering well. That is, your pain has become the focus of your life, and so it becomes this myopic, reducing like process where you become less than human, to be honest. And so what happens is, because you can't contain that, like it spreads out to everyone around you. And then your relationships are seen through that lens, right? It's, I'm always hurting, I'm always suffering, I'm always, right? And so because that person won't hold it and contain it and deal with it and relieve it, they relive it every day. And anyone that's around them takes it on. So what I would say is you have to get away from people like that, because you have to survive, but as a teenager you can't do that. So you have to run outside. That makes sense. Because it fills up the whole damn house. So that's what I'm saying. Look, if you can suffer well and you have the opportunity, please do it. Because I meet with people like that, and I grew up with people like that, and so have you. And the fallout is awful. And this is why I think when he says, hey, bear your cross, die to yourself, what he's saying is, please deal with the pain in your life, because if you don't, not only will you suffer, but those around you will suffer. And that's an example of that. It also makes sense why we run to the fridge, right? If we can't connect to another person and find relief and comfort, we need something consistent, right? So I'm grateful that you got through that, but at a huge cost. Yes, absolutely. But obviously you're strong or you wouldn't be here.
Yeah, Nick?
Yes. For someone in your position that's learned so much about the brain and the body and tools, what does it actually mean for you to feel comforted by Christ rather than just through the tools and things that you've learned?
Yeah, I think initially that made me a little crazy because I knew too much about stuff. And so it kind of fed into the way that my brain works, and the way I grew up, which was just stay in your head and figure it out. I think what it has actually done is deepen and accentuated my understanding of Christ, but also my experience of him in my body. Because when I learned these tools, part of what I started to understand is, oh my gosh, like I haven't been connected the way I needed to be. And there's a ton of trauma here, a ton of pain. And what I started to see are these are the incapacitations and the roadblocks that I'm feeling in my relationship with him. And so what it allowed me to do, some of my deepest pain was not receiving what I most needed. And so that's where my brain body was kind of broken. And so as I started to heal that, it was receiving that became the most profound thing to me in my relationship with Christ. Is that, oh my gosh, like I haven't been able to take in grace. I haven't been able to fully embody what that feels like because I haven't been present to that. Like I've been, so hopefully that answers your question. Like the tools are great, but all it's done is showed me the way, how complex the body is, but the way that it was designed by a creator, the way that it was designed by him. So not only will God protect you from certain things by shutting your brain and body down, but he'll also give you a path out to hook that back up. He'll just click the breaker, right? And once you click the breaker back on, it's there. And by the way, that's not perfect. Ask my wife, like, live with me for a while. It's not easy. But the big pain, right? But the reality is it's so much sweeter. And what I want for everyone is just what I've received. That's by no means perfect or better than anyone else. It's just deep and it's loving. That's why I can work with anyone. That's why I even do what I do, because this job is crazy, right? Like, to help people with things that you can't fix. But what I've found is people just want to know that they're loved, that they're seen, that they're understood, and that you care, so they can have the context to heal it. And then God does the healing. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's cool to be a part of.
Well, thanks for coming up here and
We got fun times.
being part of this conversation,
Yeah.
and so value your wisdom. And I mean, it's just been life-changing for me personally, and it's such a gift to the church. So thank you.
It's also important to say that if you hadn't made those steps, like, this doesn't happen the way that it does.
Well, I was thinking about what Nick was asking you, and yeah, you know, it is just so interesting to think about the pain that I tried so hard to avoid ended up being the very place where I did experience grace that I didn't know I hadn't already experienced anyway. So I don't know why we fight it so hard, and then ends up being the very place where he meets us. So I'm grateful. Well, let's pray as we close, and just thank God for this time. God, we are grateful that you are a God who can even use the worst, most painful things in our lives as opportunities to reveal more of yourself to us, that you speak to us and can hold us and show us new, beautiful things in the midst of the chaos. And thank you that you are kind to us by allowing us to step away from pain sometimes, and that you are right there when we turn and face it. And so, God, I pray for each person in this room who is carrying different levels of experiences and hardships and suffering. Lord, I pray that you will continue to walk them into those places of dread and meet them each step of the way. I do pray that we could be a good community that is safe for one another, to be vulnerable, and that we could pay more and more attention to the way that your Spirit is showing us things through our bodies and our emotions that need attention, that need care. And so help us to be kind to ourselves and to each other. And thank you for being so patient with us. We're grateful. In Jesus' name, amen.